Ladies and gentlemen, the webinar is beginning. My name is Steve Love, President and CEO of the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council. And as you know, in our continuing educational webinars, we're delighted today to host this in coordination with AMG Equipment and OR Hub, and they're associate members of the council. Today's topic is Surgical Spotlight, Illuminating the Business of Surgery. We have an expert speaker who's going to discuss how cloud-based data analytics can empower perioperative leaders to learn the key metrics that drive efficiency. Today, the discussion will include how much time do OR nurses spend gathering data into the electronic health record? How much data do you actually derive from your electronic health record? Is the data easy to access and trusted? We're delighted today that our key speaker is Blake Stock. He's the Director of Product Management and Customer Success at OR Hub. Blake has more than 13 years of healthcare experience, including more than 6 years at UC San Diego Medical Center, which is an 800-bed Level 1 trauma facility. We really look forward to this presentation. And one thing that we did want to add, Terry Goodman and Associates has graciously offered to provide 1.2 hours of CE credits for this webinar. And you're going to receive instructions at the end of the presentation on how you can access the credits. You do need, though, to be present today throughout the entire program. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Blake Stock.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Love. And I just want to do a quick sound check to make sure you all can hear me okay.
Everything's good.
Looks good.
All right. Very much appreciated. Well, thank you, everyone. And I'm just delighted to be able to talk to all of my new friends down in Texas. I'm talking to you from Seattle, Washington, where it's a nice, balmy, cold day, as per usual for our summers. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself. As Steve mentioned, I come to you from UC San Diego Medical Center. I was the Perioperative Services business manager there for over 6 years. Before that, I spent some time at Cerner. And now I'm working at a software development company in Seattle. And I can just tell you, one of the reasons I feel positioned to talk to you about analytics is my time at UCSD in 2012, we put in Epic Optime. I'm sure there's a few of you in the room that have used or are aware of Epic Optime. And there's other systems out there like Cerner, SurgeonNet, and systems like that. But in those systems, analytics is typically an afterthought. And that's what I want to talk to you a lot about today is how can we really empower perioperative providers to use analytics when we spend so much time putting data in? Are we really using data on the back end to make more informed decisions to empower our true leaders of the OR? So that's what a lot of the talk about today is going to be. So some food for thought as I'd like you to consider as we go through the presentation today. Again, how much time do you all spend putting data into your system? I know when I was at UCSD, I was blown away by how much time I saw my nursing friends on the computer. Are the analytics in the systems you have access today, are they easily accessible for you, and do you really use them? Do the OR managers and folks that do have access to analytics, are they really trusted? And what is required to actually implement an analytics program at a very high level? I'm going to arm you with some of the major steps and considerations about putting together an analytics program at your place. How can I truly use analytics for process improvement? Because at the end of the day, that is absolutely what analytics are for. Should we build or buy? This is a big question. A lot of health systems have invested a lot of money into IT teams that can build these systems. And there's a lot of competitors out in the space. I want to walk you through some of the talking points there. And at the end of the day, is your nursing leadership truly prepared to leverage analytics for empowered decision-making for the future? That's a lot of the things I want you to think about during today's discussion. Some background about the situation. You're all very aware of this. We won't spend much time on this, but in the year 2030, our over 65 population is going to triple compared to 2017. We have a major influx of demand coming in terms of the supply of operating rooms, the supply of time in the OR. The only way we're fixing that seemingly is through building more capacity. But I also feel that using analytics can help us do more with the existing infrastructure we have in place. So we know there's a wave coming our way. We need to prepare for it by not just building new facilities. We need to start using analytics to really improve our throughput, our patient access. Everyone also pretty well knows this, but perioperative services is the #1 revenue generator for most hospitals, and it's typically the #1 cost center for most hospitals. And if you're like me and you've spent time on the business side of a perioperative budget, half of the dollars in my entire perioperative services budget is for labor, implants, and supplies come next. And it's typically about $2,000 an hour to keep an operating room open. That translates, by the way, to about $5 million a year for one OR to be kept open. This, of course, is going to vary depending on ambulatory surgery centers and level 1 inpatient trauma centers and places like that. But in general, it's really expensive to run an OR. We all know this, so minutes matter. And secondarily here, reimbursement is really trending towards value-based payment or bundled payments, where you're not necessarily just billing for time anymore. You're really only being reimbursed by the procedure and the bundle that goes with it. So we're trying to be as efficient with the usage of our OR equipment, our OR staff as possible, and that's what we want to use analytics to help us improve. So what is the challenge that I think we can really tackle during today's conversation? One of the things that I've always had on my mind, because I've worked so closely with nursing and anesthesia, is how can we truly improve the nurse and the patient experience? Well, there's a few ways, very direct ways we can look at it, and there's some indirect ways. First of all is, hey, can we schedule our cases more appropriately? I think if there's a few nurses in the room there, you've all been in the OR when a certain surgeon has a case booked for 100 minutes and you know that case is going to be 3-4 hours. It happens. Well, there's a lot of downstream effects that has on planning in the OR. It has on patient experience on the following cases starting on time. We need to tighten that up, and we can use some pretty simple analytics to help you there. We all know we need to start cases on time. I'm going to show you some on-time start analytics and first case start analytics that are really par for the course and kind of blow you away in terms of, only about 1/3 of all cases in the OR start on time across the entire country. We were an airline, and we're not. It wouldn't be all that acceptable. And I can tell you, my family members have sat in OR waiting rooms waiting for me to go into a case as a patient, and it adds a lot of stress to the patient. Of course, we want to help match staffing to the demand of the OR. Sometimes staff feel like they're absolutely overburdened and they're running at 110%. Other times, staff feel fairly underburdened, and there's a joke going around about nurses playing cards in the hospital. That is a joke, and that's a politician, of course, but we've all been there when we're trying to match up the staffing of the OR to the demand of the OR. We can use analytics to help us there. We all know a few surgeons who have a lot of block time made available to them. They're legacy surgeons. They've got lots of time available, and sometimes that time goes unused. Well, gosh, can we help improve patient access by matching block size to surgeon volume? I'm going to share some of that with you as well. And how can we improve the nurse and patient experience by sharing materials data with surgeons daily? I'm going to go really deep into that topic because it's not obvious. And at the end of the day, and I was trained by a lot of fantastic nurses, at the end of the day, can we do all this and still improve the bottom line? And I'm going to tell you the answer is yes. And I also want you to know that I feel it's really important that we do need to be able to speak to the bottom line so that we can make a case for analytics in our institution, because at the end of the day, to truly empower nurses in the OR, they have to be able to speak a little bit of the language of finance. Now, I'm not telling you to go get an MBA or a finance degree, but I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to translate your needs to a financial figure. And I think it's really important that you take that away from today's discussion. And so why aren't we using current analytics tools today? Most nurses you talk to in the OR or anesthesiologists will tell you the tools lack timeliness. The data I only get once a month or once a week. It's not easy to access. I can't find the reports. They're too hard to manage. They're not flexible. Hey, I've got specific business rules and they're not being accounted for here. The reports aren't intuitive enough. Sometimes it's not actionable. And at the end of the day, a lot of the data you get to isn't necessarily trusted. So there's a big barrier for perioperative leaders to use analytics. Healthcare in general has been a fairly late stage adopter of modern information technology. And so there's so many great new tools out there that, for example, most of you are walking around with an iPhone or an Android device. And I see you all doing really complicated usage of applications and even some analytics on those devices. Yet when you go into work and you go use your EHR, I don't see that. Why is that? There's a big incongruity there. And again, because there's these barriers, analytics aren't being used to really leverage process improvement facilities. And I think there's a big gap there that you can fill yourself at your own facility. And there's certainly vendors out there that can help. And one thing I'll leave you with before we go to the next slide is when I first started using Epic, one of my IT resources said, well, Blake, there's 2,000 reports on the OR alone in Epic. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, can I have a report for where all 2,000 reports live? It's a little bit of overkill. I don't think anyone needs 2,000 reports to manage anything. It should be counted on two hands, maybe three. So what are the core surgical analytics to get any OR started with using analytics to run their business? I'm going to list off some of the core analytics reports that are out there that most groups should have as a starting point, and there's certainly many more, and we won't cover them all today. We're going to cherry pick a few. But we certainly need to know volumes in the OR and the PACU. We need to know on-time starts for all cases and for first cases. We have to have a good understanding of room turnover time as well as procedure turnover time. We need to know how well our surgeons and surgeon schedulers are booking cases. Are they booking them too long? Are they booking them too short? At the end of the day, what is our prime time and our block utilization? Those are incredibly important numbers to understand. How are cancellations day of and day before affecting our business? In an operating room environment, can you just simply pull a patient off the floor or off the street and do surgery? You might, but it might be frowned upon. How is the OR and the PACU being occupied? Or put another way, what is the demand of those resources by day of the week and hour of the day? What is the materials and labor cost per case? We need to go deep into that. And we're going to talk a lot about cost per case today a bit, because at the end of the day, a budget is comprised of labor and non-labor. And if the non-labor budget is suffering, a lot of times administration will take that on the labor side. So I want to empower the perioperative nurses and leadership to understand that data. We've all heard of some headlines lately where surgeons are running 2, sometimes 3 rooms, and how does that impact quality? How does it impact operations? And we're going to introduce the concept of a daily case receipt today. We're going to talk about. So just in general, there's kind of a core handbag of core analytics you really need to get off the ground and running, and then from there, let your imagination take you away. So before we get into the analytics, I want to talk a bit about what does it really take to leverage analytics at your organization. And I think with anything, you have to start with people. And some of these are obvious. You clearly are going to need IT programmers for data extraction, transformation, calculation. You've probably got an IT team at your facility right now that has these people. Secondarily, you do need a product leader, and that can be an internal resource, someone to really drive the creation of these analytics. And this is also where a lot of vendors come in. You need to have someone who truly understands what's going on in your OR and how informatics works. And I will tell you, I had 6 years working in the OR spending time with anesthesia, spending time with nursing. I am not a clinician, but I spent 6 years listening to their issues and tracking how data runs through the system. So if you're going to be successful at putting an analytics program together, you do truly want a product leader, an internal champion, or a vendor that really understands your workflow. I will tell you, one of the things I ran into in my career was a lot of my IT informatics friends very rarely came into my OR. I would tell you as a tip, insist that they spend a few days in your OR and more if possible, but get them out of their office, have them come into your environment, show them exactly the issues you're running into. They need to build empathy for you because you are the customer. That's a big part of the people piece of getting analytics off the ground. Thirdly, and a lot of folks underestimate this critical step, which is very political. You've got to have buy-in from finance. You definitely have to have buy-in from your information technology group, whether you're building or buying, and you definitely want senior leadership to support this program. You are, at the end of the day, competing for dollars within your institution. So by politically pulling these three major pillars into your program, you'll get the support you need. And of course, this is obvious enough, but the stakeholders you want around the table, you should clearly have OR nursing. You can't get anything done without the silent majority. Anesthesia is a great resource because they really understand all the inner workings of the OR as well as procedural areas. You certainly want to bring your surgeons to the table if you can here. If you've got a business manager or an administrator, pull them in. And it's never a bad idea to have your procurement friends part of this as well. In terms of process, some of the things that I highly recommend is that you identify at least one person from each of the stakeholder groups above to participate in the design, the development, testing, and the usage of any analytics program that you either buy or build. Secondarily, you want to project and you want to certainly review the return on investment that you intend to gain with analytics. It's not cheap to build an analytics product internally. It's always not cheap to buy it from a vendor. So when you're competing for dollars internally against other investments like robots or building a new facility, you want to make sure that you can speak to your finance team and say, hey, if we build this program or if we buy this program, we're going to get some juice out of the squeeze. Thirdly, and I think this is the most overlooked tenet of the process, which is whomever is building your product has to have a consumer-first mindset. This is often not the case in the facility that you work in. I know I dealt with this at UCSD. My IT team didn't necessarily treat me like a customer, and I really felt that. And this is why in my choice to build internally, I kind of had to make myself the customer. And that's not always easy to do, but if you're going to build analytics internally, make sure that you are the customer. And if you're working with a vendor, make sure that they don't forget you're the customer. Fourthly, you want to spend a lot of time making sure that leaders really understand how to use analytics. They need to have understanding of the calculations, the different dimensions, where the data comes from, how it gets into the system. This is all integral to making sure that leaders actually know how to use this data, because otherwise it's a really expensive paperweight to have. Fourthly, a good friend of mine, Dr. Bobby Lazara, always talks about having a unified systems approach. And what he's truly talking about there is if you've got an analytics product that surgeons and anesthesiologists and nursing can all look at and agree upon a common set of facts, you need to agree to work together on that system and you do it in a unified way for true process improvement. And I think fifth, we never want to forget that analytics has to evolve. Just like your business is evolving, and as you tackle certain problems, you evolve into new problems, your analytics must evolve. You're going to find vendors out there that don't evolve. You're going to find your own IT teams may not help you evolve your internal product. It has to be a core tenet of your process. And then the last piece of people, process, and technology is you have to have someone to extract data, you've got to have a data warehouse. Don't worry, your IT team already has this, and vendors have this as well. You should be looking at some modern visualization tools. There's a great company called Tableau, a just as good company called ClickView, Microsoft, Power BI. There are fantastic visualization tools. And by the way, analytics on a spreadsheet are very hard for humans to consume. So if you're getting spreadsheets and you're doing manual calculations, it's going to be harder for you to make use of those insights. Whereas if you have visualization tools, those pictures can tell a story much better than raw data. And from a technology point of view, you really do need to have a build or buy discussion. A lot of internal IT teams feel that they can build these tools, and they probably can. The question is, should they? And do they have the expertise? And do they have the budget to do so? The one thing to consider around that build or buy conversation is, should you go out and procure an analytics product? And there's a lot of them out there in the perioperative space. There's some big systems like Optum. There's some very focused systems like LeanTox. And there's other vendors out there. One of the things you'll want to talk to your procurement team about is when they do a request for proposal, or what we all call an RFP, there's a handful of elements that you should think about as a team. How much money do you want to spend on these products? Do you want to spend millions, or do you want to spend tens of thousands? I'm certainly aware of competitors and vendors out there that can cost 7 figures and others that come in just above 6 figures. How depthy do the reports have to be? Are they simple one question, one answer analytics, or do the analytics truly have drill down capability to help you in comprehensive storytelling? We never want to forget about data quality. Does the vendor offer you garbage in, garbage out, or are they doing meta-analysis of that data? What's the training requirement for these products? Do you have to hire an expert FTE or hire an analyst to just be the sole user of the system, or is it accessible for the nurse with 30 years experience? What does the customer support look like? What's the phase of care? There's some analytics companies that focus just on block utilization or cost per case. Others may look at the entire perioperative continuum. So what's your need there? How easy is it to implement these tools? Does it take months, or is it done in weeks? And I think one of the most important things to look at is, what does the product leadership look like for the vendor you might be looking at? Are they IT engineers that are very, very well trained in digital technology? Or are they leaders that come from the OR and have some clinical background? And of course, what's the customer commitment? Do I have to sign a multi-year contract, or can I do a pay-as-you-go model? Again, these are just some tips to start off a request for proposal should you decide to go out there and buy a product from the larger market. At the end of the day, analytics is all about process improvement. And some of you may have heard of Lean Six Sigma. It's really, it started in Japan with Toyota in manufacturing, and it's bled into all certain other industries. It's now making its way into healthcare. I'm sure you're quite aware. The key focus here is all about collaboration amongst your team. So I talk a lot about collaborating with surgeons, anesthesiologists, and staff to get this off the ground. And at the end of the day, you're really trying to remove waste and reducing variation. Makes your day more certain and a little more stable. Even though I know my old nursing director said, Blake, we get one normal day a month in the OR. And I kind of thought that was a very telling comment about the OR. And at the end of the day, the acronym I'll leave you with is DMAIC. We're going to talk a bit about more of this, but if you're going to do process improvement, you've got to define what excellence means. You've got to measure, analyze, improve, and control. We're going to touch on that in a minute next. So in terms of improving your perioperative ecosystem with analytics, one of the first things you have to do, and this can be tricky, is define what excellence truly means in your facility. For example, if my on-time starts are at 55%, what is excellence? Is excellence getting to 75%? Is it getting to 80%? Well, we know 100% isn't really possible. So let's set a common goal that we define as excellence. We can always change it over time, but we have to have a definition we can all agree on. And more importantly, which data elements actually contribute to that. So we need to go deep on the definition. Secondly, with analytics, you then have to measure those key performance indicators. I want to know what my progress is towards that goal. I don't want to just check it once a quarter or even once a month. I want to know every day, how are we performing towards that measurement? Thirdly, we have to do some analysis. At the end of the day, we can't just put in a tool and hope our numbers get better just because we're measuring ourselves. But we do have to spend a lot of time analyzing the data, looking for outliers, and drilling in to truly find the cause of the issue. So for example, we're going to talk about first case on-time starts later, and I'm going to show you how we're going to identify some outliers visually, and then we're going to look at some delay reasons to really drill in and understand the cause for that service line to be late so often. The fourth step of Lean Six Sigma is you have to then make the improvements. So once you've done your measurement, once you've identified outliers and identified causes, let's put your actions, your insights into action, and then let's watch the needle move. Once you see those improvements, or you may not see the improvements, let's go ahead and look at the control. Let's continue to review that data to make sure we're sustaining our gains, because after all, we don't want to just make this improvement once when everyone's watching and then next month forget all about it. We have to build it into the culture of routinely reviewing our improvements to make sure that we hold those gains so that the financial improvements and the experiential improvements for patients and staff continue to stay put. So we're going to jump into some analytics on the second half of the presentation here and really show you what a visually pleasing view of maybe on-time starts could look like. So I think the first way to lay this screen out is along the top ribbon are the summary statistics. So for example, at this particular OR, we're looking at a main operating room. I'm looking at 33% of all cases are in fact starting on time. And as we talked about earlier, that's not exactly a fantastic number, but for a main OR that may be dealing with some trauma and some burn cases and maybe some transplant bumping going on, it's reasonable. Additionally, we can see that 56% of first cases are starting on time. Well, that's a qualitative metric, 33 and 56%. The best way to complement a qualitative metric, a qualitative metric is a quantitative metric. So next you'll see, what are the average delay minutes for all cases? Well, it's 59. So that's 59 minutes for every case is the average delay, and 24 minutes for every first case is delay. So again, you'll notice the theme going forward is oftentimes I'll show a qualitative paired with a quantitative metric. That quantitative metric is incredibly important because we're going to use that to quantify the fiscal impact so that we can get folks' attention to help us fix these problems. So one thing Lean Six Sigma will tell you is you can't boil the ocean. Well, what do they mean by that? Well, you can't just go out and fix all cases starting on time, but you can fix first cases. And that's why so many ORs around the country focus first on first cases. So what are we going to do? We're going to set a filter on the data set to show us first cases only. You'll notice that our on-time start percent for first cases is at 50% for this dashboard. We know that the average delay is about 21 minutes, and I can also see the case delay minutes of total late minutes is about 6,733. So that's quite a bit of time over 6 months where first cases were scheduled to start and had not started. It's a lot of time of idle nurses, surgical techs, anesthesiologists, or surgeons, or even radiology techs waiting for a case to start. I also want to be able to see what my trend looks like over time. So the on-time start trend in the top left corner gives me an idea how my team is performing over time from month to month to month. That's important because I want to continually review my progress. I then show on-time starts by surgeon and on-time starts by anesthesiologist. Now, I might be looking at Dr. Lodge, Dr. Roby. I might be looking at those two as some outliers because they've got an awful lot of late cases. Now, I'm not going to just pick on those surgeons because they're not the only ones that can cause a case to be late. There's a whole surgical team there, but they are part of it. On the right there, we can see on-time starts by anesthesiologists, and I can look at the data in this way as well. So as I'm looking at this data, you'll notice in the bottom left, the total late starts by delay. You'll notice surgeon late is an awfully big option. OR room not ready, giving medications, missing labs, and there's also a big pie there where there's missing delay reasons. It's important that nurses understand the import of putting the data into the system so that we can actually use it for process improvement later. But this is common, by the way. So as we talk more about on-time starts, one of the things, again, I always stress to folks is we have to be able to speak to the financial value. So what is the financial value? I think where most folks need to start is what's a minute of OR time worth? If you read literature and you talk to your finance team, you'll find that an operating room minute is worth about $33 a minute. So again, talk to your finance folks, get that dollar figure from them, and begin using this as part of your ROI statement. If the total delay minutes annually is 13,400 minutes, I've just doubled the 6,733 for 6 months. So it's about 13,000 total minutes a year of delay time. At $33 a minute, that's a $440,000 problem. So is it worth it to invest some money in some analytics to help you improve this process? I think if we can move our on-time starts from 50% up to 75%, there's a $221,000 opportunity there. So again, not the funnest thing for everyone to talk money, but this also will get attention from the IT team, from the finance team, and from leadership. Show some sophistication to say, hey, we need these analytics. We need to make the process better. And by the way, your patients will have a better experience, and your nursing team is going to have a better experience. So these are important things to keep in mind. Next, we're going to talk a little bit, actually we're going to drill down a little bit deeper here, and we're going to look at just the urology service line. Now you'll notice in the filter that I've applied, it's just for urology surgeons. And when I look at the data here, they're at 36%. So again, I'm not going to boil the ocean and work on every service line. I may go look at a few of the service lines that have very poor numbers and start looking at their total delay reasons. What's kind of interesting, the number one delay reason for urology is that the room is not ready. Well, I wonder if there's some lasers that they need or some lithotripsy machines that may not be ready. We can dig into that data, but surgeon being late is not a big issue for urology. So gosh, maybe we need to go understand exactly what's causing this. We can fix some of those problems and improve those numbers. And at the end of the day, with every analytics tool you look at, whether again you're going to build it internally or you're going to go out and buy it on the market, make sure that you can get to the raw data that actually makes up the analytics. Everything I've shown you previous to this is summarized data. If you can't get down to the case level and see the wheels in and the scheduled start and all the raw data, you're always going to have folks that may not trust the data. So having access to this is incredibly important. Not something I look at on a routine basis, but I want to make sure it's there so I can have a conversation and prove the validity of the analytics we're looking at. All right, room scheduling accuracy. So this is always a fun topic because we know every surgeon books their cases appropriately. Joking, of course. So one of the things I want to walk you through is a very simple exercise on the calculation itself. If a scheduled room is booked for 100 minutes and we allow a 20% threshold, that means if the case runs between 80 minutes and 120 minutes long, we'll call the case accurate. If this case in fact ran 125 minutes, let's call the case as long, a qualitative answer. And what is the quantitative value? 25 minutes. What's the issue with cases running long? Well, you're going to run into overtime. You're also going to delay the next case, which can have an impact on patient and staff experience. Let's look at the second case. It was booked for 200 minutes. A 20% allowance means 160 to 240 minutes we would call accurate. It came in at 170 minutes, wheels in to wheels out. So hey, the case is booked accurately. Any issues? No. The third case, 100 minutes room scheduled duration. It came in at 60 minutes, so the case ran short. Well, what's the issue there? While gaps in schedule can lead to lower utilization of the room, can lead to lowered patient access. So these are the different ways we want to look at these analytics. Now, I certainly don't want to do this for all 50 cases a day or 100 cases a day. I want an analytics product to do this for me. When I look at an analytics screen like this, I start at the very top to look at the summary of statistics. Hey, 53% of all cases are booked accurately. That's okay. Only 10% of cases run short. 37% of cases run longer than we've scheduled them for. That's a very common trend I continue to see across the country, and it's partially human nature. Surgeons like to get as many cases booked in a day as possible. We can't fault them for this. This is how they're compensated often. But we do want to make sure we have some analytics on this, because we know that cases running long can have very big impacts on staff and on patient experience and the bottom line. If I'm using this data, I also want to be able to drill into who the outliers are. Well, if I go look at Dr. Ladd and Dr. Halds, I can see that they are only 31% accurate when they book cases. Additionally, 66% of their cases run longer than they schedule the room for. These two folks have major impacts on the schedule and the certainty of the schedule in the OR, and it has a lot of downstream effects on patient experience. When these surgeons do book, they're about 46 minutes long on average. And look at the number in the very top right. It's a quantitative value, 18,000 minutes of unscheduled OR time in 6 months. That's kind of what we call hijacking an OR. You can't really plan around that. It's a big issue. And by the way, these aren't necessarily transplant cases or highly variable cases. If you look at the case schedule accuracy by procedure, these are arthroplasty hip anterior approach. These are arthroplasty knee. These are fairly common procedures that we kind of have a good idea what we're getting into. And again, we've identified the outliers. We now want to look at ways to help them improve. And we can clearly say, hey, arthroplasty hip anterior approach is a problem. Let's work with those schedulers and let's start to book those cases a little longer so that the OR team can truly plan for that day. And that way, the following patients are actually going to get into the room when they think they're going to get into the room. There's a lot to be said about certainty. And the last thing I just would mention here are, what are some of the issues? Again, overtime, staff satisfaction, following cases starting late, patient dissatisfaction, higher levels of stress. Anesthesiologists can get high levels of dissatisfaction, and often the PACU team is now staying over later, and they're going to incur a lot of overtime costs. So there's, again, a lot to be said about booking cases appropriately. And you as nurses, you already know this. This is nothing new to you, but it's nice to have a very clear picture of what your intuition tells you. You all know the 1 or 3 surgeons that seem to be the issue. Wouldn't it be nice to just show them a single screen, say, hey, let's have an adult conversation. Let's fix this. All right. One more example of some actual calculation. So one question a lot of folks have is, how do I discern what the occupancy of my OR is? Well, we'll do a calculation first, and then I'll show you how an analytics tool will do this. The first case, indicated by the first red box, ran from 9:39 a.m. to 10:46 a.m. One way you could look at occupancy is to say, hey, from 9:39 to 10, that's 21 minutes. So 21 minutes divided by 60 is 35%. So 35% of the hour was occupied by case 1. That's the 9 o'clock hour. At the 10 o'clock hour, 46 minutes of the hour were used. That's 77%. Case 2, you'll see at 8 a.m., 25% of that hour was used. That's 15 minutes. At the 9 o'clock hour, the entire hour was used. So it's 100% occupied for that hour. And for the 10 o'clock hour, another 43 minutes were in use. So 72% of that hour was occupied. You can imagine doing this for 20, 50, 100 cases a day gets really tedious. So that's why it's great to have IT friends to build these calculations for you and then turn it into a very nice visualization. The visualization we have here, just so you're all aware, I would work with my nursing directors on staffing models. And a lot of times those staffing models didn't change that often. Yet we saw big changes in volume by day of week, by hour of day. And one of the things I kind of thought to myself with an economics background is your staffing model is your supply. So what's the demand? This is truly the demand for the OR. So if I look at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in terms of a heat map, I can quickly realize that, hey, Wednesdays are just not as heavy as Mondays are by a factor of almost 2 rooms. And a lot of times your staffing during prime time is pretty easy. You know how to staff for the number of rooms that you have blocked. But if you get into the 7, 8, 9 o'clock hour, how many rooms are truly running across a given month, a given week? You really want to know, because you might have 3 teams staffed at 7 o'clock, but if you're only running at max 1.4 rooms, is that appropriate? And you all know that if you have a trauma team on, or if you have teams that support neuroservice, you've got to build that into your model, but at least you have a demand to look at to help inform your decisions on staffing. And on the right, we have 2 line graphs. The lighter blue is for January, the darker blue is for February. It's a really nice visual indication to show you how that demand is changing month over month. And again, these are just tools to help you get a grip on exactly how you should be staffing and if you have any optimizations to make. One other way to use this data, by the way, is if you're really feeling pressed for more staff and your finance folks just seem to not be giving an inch, pull a report like this in. Pull them into the discussion and say, hey guys, I got 8 rooms running at 9 a.m. on Mondays. I need more staff. And by the way, it's growing. And again, it's going to help you have conversations with finance folks that may not necessarily understand your business. So by having this common conversation over analytics, you can get more done with them. Block utilization. I'm not going to take you through a calculation exercise because this stuff gets pretty complicated. One thing I will share with you is you'll notice I have a YouTube link up here. We actually have a video that's about 5 minutes long, and it will walk you through a very detailed calculation exercise on how to do block. I will qualify that with every facility I've ever worked with does block utilization slightly differently. So just be prepared if you're trying to optimize block allocation for patient access. You really want to sit down with a crew of a team and committee of people to understand how ought we calculate block. There's a lot of best practices out there, but everyone's different. So if you're interested, that link will get you to our video. In terms of the visualization of block utilization, I've been in block committee before. And a lot of times, if the data is not visually telling, you can spend a lot of time at the block committee just looking at spreadsheets of data and not making changes. So the core goal of this report is let's make the data as easily accessible as possible. So we're looking at February to May data. We know that overall the entire team of surgeons is at 62%. I know that the green bar for Dr. Roby represents how many in-block minutes that surgeon has used. I know that the purple bar indicates how many turnover minutes we're going to give that surgeon credit for. We're not going to count turnover against the surgeon. They can't be in the room anyways. The gray bar represents all of the unused block minutes for that surgeon. So I can quickly discern which surgeons have the most unused time. And this is how I'm going to begin making reallocation decisions to improve my patient access. So again, like anything I've talked about, I'm always going to give you some sort of financial assessment. So at this particular facility that has 10 ORs, they issue 1.2 million block minutes a year. 38% of those minutes go unused. So just shy of 500,000 minutes a year, or 484,000 minutes. If we set a goal of reclaiming just 5% of those block minutes, that's 24,000 minutes. If the average case plus turnover time is 180 minutes, that means I can increase patient access yearly by 133 cases. May not sound like a lot, but if you take all of those minutes and you build them out at the average rate of about $33 a minute, it's almost an $800,000 economic opportunity a year. That's a major gain. So your finance folks will be happy, and also your patients will be happy. They'll be able to be scheduled quicker. And I also venture a guess some surgeons may not be as happy because they don't have as much time to book into, but other surgeons who were rewarded with strong utilization, with more time, they're going to be happy. And all of a sudden, you're going to create a culture of reward for usage of a very expensive resource. And speaking of that, we're going to go look at Dr. Najee. Dr. Najee works clearly on Mondays and Fridays. She is at 84% in block utilization. This is a surgeon that should be rewarded with more time. And since she works on Mondays and Fridays, let's go take a look at Tuesdays and Thursdays, and let's see who's performing well on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm specifically looking at Dr. Jeanette and Dr. Ostraw. And I can see also up at the very top, the third surgeon down, Dr. Brownlee, very large gray bar of unused time. So if I was going to sit at block committee, I could quickly pull this data up and I could say, hey guys, Brownlee doesn't have, has a lot of unused OR time on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Maybe our previous surgeon who's doing very well is looking for time on either a Tuesday or Thursday. Let's try to reallocate maybe a half day or a full day a month to that other surgeon. Let's make subtle changes to improve patient access. They can have big economic outcomes for you. I'll talk a little bit about cadence of cases and what they cost. This report here grabs each timestamp across the perioperative continuum from scheduled start to wheels in. We see an average of 18 minutes. From wheels in to incision, we see an average of 18 minutes again. Suture to wheels out at 5 minutes. And then you'll notice we actually have an intraoperative cost attached to that. Again, remember, when a surgeon's using an OR, there's a cost with every minute there. One of the things we're actually doing here is we are pulling in just one case now. We're going to look at one case by Dr. Kite. This is actually a knee arthroscopy. And we know that intraoperatively, we've got 24 minutes of wheels into incision, 31 minutes of procedure time, 4 minutes of suture to wheels out. Well, all told, when I add up all those numbers and I multiply the average intraoperative cost at $23, now that $23, that can be up to your finance team. You guys can decide what that number is, but I can now understand what is the total labor cost for that case. It's about $1,357. This patient then spent some time in the PACU, and depending on how long they're in the PACU, we can put a price tag on that of roughly $590 because we put it at about $10 a minute. And again, those are variables that facilities can set, but we do want to have painted a clear picture on what it costs to do a case. This is all feedback we can share with our physicians because at the end of the day, reimbursements aren't necessarily growing, so cost containment is where we have to focus. And of course, we don't want to do this irrespective of quality, but we do need to have some of these metrics. One of the last analytics reports I'm going to walk you through is materials cost per case. And I think it's incredibly important to understand how this data actually gets into your operating room information system. So at the beginning of the day, procurement is going to go out and buy a material like a suture or an implant. And they're going to buy it through a materials management information system. That data is typically in Epic, Cerner, and Meditech, and other systems going to interface nightly into your OR information system. And it's going to populate what they call a materials file. And you're all familiar with this because you've probably built or have managed a preference card. And when you're managing those preference cards, you're essentially telling the case picking team what to bring to your case for you. Now, some of you nurses are probably picking your own cases. Some of you work at big institutions may have case pickers. So when those case pickers use that preference card, they're loading up a case card, it's showing up in your room, and then you, the nurse, in the green box there, you're documenting usage and wastage on your pick list right in the OR. And that's actually the documentation we want to use for understanding materials cost per case. And we also want the acquisition cost of products from the materials management information system. And we, of course, know that after this, the data goes off to a charge router to drive patient billing. But we are interested in the usage and wastage, and from a procurement point of view, we want to understand cost per case. And I'll just pause to reflect. Why do we care so much about materials cost per case? Well, at the end of the day, the budget is finite and it's one piece of pie. And most administrators you'll talk to know that there's only two ways to control a budget. It's either through labor or non-labor, which is materials. And if the labor cost, if materials cost can't be controlled, they will then go looking for savings in labor. And as employees, that's certainly not something we want. We always feel like we need more labor, and I'm with you. I feel like we do too. So if we can control material cost per case by working with surgeons, we can free up more dollars in the budget for labor. So that's why understanding cost per case is so important for nursing leaders in an OR setting. Again, it's all one pie that we want to look at. And these analytics here, we're looking at total knee arthroplasties. We know we've spent $3 million in 5 months on knee arthroplasties, $9,700 a case. I can see the cost disparity between surgeons. I can look at the data in terms of market share, where Zimmer and Smith and Nephew compete against each other. I can see how implants, blades, burrs, and bits all stack up to how cost per case is driven for this procedure. And maybe I can partner with a surgeon group to say, hey, let's work on getting your average cost per case down. That'll save us money in the budget for hiring more people, buying new capital, building a facility, or maybe even give us all raises or bonuses, what have you. The last piece I'll share with you is building trust in data is incredibly important. Most surgeons I work with, when I share with them what the cost of implants or supply is or are, they're very unaware. And so it's really hard to partner with them in reducing cost per case if they don't understand usage of implants and supplies. One surgeon I've worked with in Florida, as soon as I began sending him a surgical case receipt, he asked me, hey, why are we using $50 sutures on this case? When he talked to the nurse who manages preference card, she said, well, that's just what's been on the preference card now for 5 years. He said, well, gosh, is there a $10 or a $15 suture I can get my hands on and try? And she says, of course we can do that. So a little bit of transparency can move the needle in a very positive way. Other things that nurses have reported is that when surgeons see 4 sutures used on a case, but the surgeon only used 2, maybe the nurse actually opened all 4 to be prepared for the surgeon's demand and his eagerness to have that suture. All of a sudden, by showing him that that's a cost to the case, sometimes you will see a change in the dialogue between surgeons and nurses. The surgeon may say, hey, just open the 2, leave the other 2 on the back table unopened until I absolutely need it. Maybe, may not be true for every surgeon-nurse relationship, but I have seen it happen, and it's something that can subtly change the culture in your OR. So the very last thing I will discuss with you guys is it's really important to think about quality of data. Most OR information systems do not build in hard stops. They don't build in chronological checks. And so sometimes if you're using bad data, you're going to get bad analytics and you're going to get mistrusted analytics. So whether you're building or you're buying, make sure that whomever you're working with has some way of looking at data quality. Well, if we look at the first case here, what seems to be the issue? Well, the issue is that suture is well after wheels out. 10:22 p.m. is about 12 hours after 10:35 a.m. That can have a major impact on your analytics if this goes unnoticed. So you definitely want to have a tool to help you surface these issues, get it back to the staff member that may have accidentally put in p.m. instead of a.m. It happens. You're some of the busiest people I've ever seen work, so it's okay that you make human mistakes. That's part of life. But to have a quality control tool in place to help you make those improvements is very needed. And then what's wrong with the second case there? Well, the second case, incision comes before wheels in. Again, subtle things that happen, but we definitely want to make those corrections, and we do need tools to help us surface those issues. All right, closing thoughts before Q&A. I think if there's anything you took away from the presentation, what I really want you to understand and feel confident in is I need you to be able to prepare a financial case for analytics in your OR. Remember, you're going to be competing against other teams. You're going to be competing against surgeons that want to buy robots. You're competing against the cath lab who wants to hire more people. You're competing against everyone in your institution for dollars, and so you need to be able to speak a little bit of finance. At the end of the day, whether you're building or buying, you need to feel like you're the customer. There's so many times I've seen in different facilities that the nursing team do not feel like the customer. IT team doesn't go out of their way to truly provide that customer service. You need to feel like the customer, whether you're building internally, and if you're buying from a vendor, make sure they treat you like a customer too. Thirdly, it's incredibly important to spend time sitting down outside of the OR, educating yourself on the analytics. Understand how those calculations are put together, like I've shared with you. Understand how to read the reports to identify the outliers, and then to drill down into the issues causing those problems. Because at the end of the day, you need to put your insights into action to move the needle. Fourth, it is incredibly imperative, as Dr. Lazara always teaches me, you have to make sure you're collaborating with your surgeons and your anesthesiologists. You can't do it alone. And at the end of the day, are there gains sharing opportunities available? Gain sharing is pretty interesting. You can certainly do that when you've got agreed upon analytics. And lastly, I think the most important closing comment is you really can make better decisions with analytics that can absolutely improve your patient access. They can improve your patient experience. Your staff can be happier. You can improve the team culture. And at the end of the day, we can improve your bottom line using analytics. So I appreciate you guys allowing me to speak to you. I hope this was semi-informational for you, and hopefully you take some of this back to your institution and start using analytics to improve your OR. And the last thing I will put in there is please don't forget, for the 1.2 CEU, this is Terry Goodman and Associates contact information, and I'll leave this up during Q&A.
Okay, great, Blake. If anyone has questions, type them into the box there, please. Okay, we have one here, Blake. How do we get surgeons to trust the data?
Great question. Great question. I think one of the first ways I have worked towards getting surgeons to trust data is through a daily surgical case receipt. Now, this is something you can have your own IT team build, and again, there are vendors that offer this. That daily surgical case receipt is delivered with multiple points of data, and it's delivered typically a day or two after the case. It's going to show scheduled start time. It's going to show wheels in, incision, suture, wheels out. It's going to show how long the case is booked for. It's going to show all the implants that were documented as used or wasted. When surgeons begin to see small doses of their own data in a routine environment, they are more likely to believe and trust larger aggregate sets of data. So it may not seem like a direct answer, but feeding them small doses of data day after day after day is going to actually disarm them a bit, so that when you show them a first case on-time start report, or when you show them a booking accuracy report, or a cost per case report, they're actually much more likely to believe it because they're seeing the data every day saying, hey, this was a first case, you were late by 15 minutes, the delay reason was surgeon late. And you begin to disarm them that way. I'm not going to tell you it's a foolproof option, but it is one tactic as part of a larger strategy to engage your surgeons on getting them to trust the data.
Okay, we have another one here. Who are the primary vendors in the perioperative analytics space?
Yeah, sure. So there is a slide on here, and maybe I'll just jump back real briefly actually, I'm going to leave it right here. So there's some big ones. Optum is a very big vendor that's been around for a very long time. They're typically on the high side of costs, and they've got a pretty intensive program. There is a company called SYUS, SYUS. They're a competitor of ours, and they give and offer core analytics. There's a company called LeanToss. LeanToss offers some really great analytics on block utilization and tools around block. There's also OR Hub. I just so happen to work for OR Hub, and we provide analytics from just about everything you've seen here today. So that's kind of the core 4 or 5. And I think if you do some Googling out there, you're going to find some others. And certainly if you're really interested, go talk to your procurement team and ask them to do a little research for you. But the ones I've mentioned there, again, Optum, LeanToss, SIAS, and OR Hub seem to be the 4 biggest competitors in the space.
I have another one here. How much time do I need to ask IT to implement a system like this?
That is a fantastic question. IT teams never like to be surprised. I would tell you this, depending on whether you're building or buying. So I'll start with the answer of build. If you're building a tool like this from scratch internally, I will tell you I've done it, and it took me about 9 months. And that was with one dedicated programmer. I'm not telling you it's going to take 9 months. If you really know what you're doing, and unlike me, I kind of did it in the dark, and I had to stumble my way through and skin my knee every week on it. It was 9 months. But if you're doing it internally and you've got a really great team, it could be a 6-month project. Now, if you're buying in the market, there are some companies that will come in and tell you, hey, we're going to have a 3 to 5 month implementation cycle. You will also find other vendors like OR Hub and SIAS that have really short implementation cycles. And the way they get them so short is a lot of vendors will actually have the data queries required to give to your IT team. They run those queries, extract the data, and you're off and running. So companies like mine, we typically tell our IT customers, hey, it's 20 to 30 hours of your time, and it typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to get a program like this off the ground and running. So a lot of varying answers out there. But again, if you're going to procure a tool like this in the market, make sure you're asking those vendors, how long does this take in terms of total time, and how much requirement is on my IT team? That is a great question.
Okay, I have another question here from the same person. If my IT wants to build this internally, what advice do you have for me?
Okay, so that is a fantastically loaded question, and I will do my best. So oftentimes, IT teams will, by nature, have a gut reaction to say, this is my space, and we should be building this. And I don't disagree with them. They should be. The problem we run into is they haven't. And I think another problem that you run into is oftentimes IT teams are generalists. And I say this in the most affectionate way, but they support the emergency room. They support imaging. They support the lab. They support the ICU and inpatient and revenue cycle. So for them to be experts in your business as an operating room professional, they are not going to understand the subtleties and the importance of all the metrics I just showed you. The things I showed you were very natural for you to consume, whereas from an IT member who hasn't spent a lot of time in the OR, they may not understand the value of those subtleties. So I think one of the advices I would offer is this. Never a bad idea, never wrong to have your IT team want to build this. The question is, do they or should they? It might take them a lot of time. It might take them a lot of time to continue to support the product. It's going to take them a lot of time to evolve the product. So it's a very big investment for them to put FTEs towards a product like this. They've got to continue to pay them, benefits, everything involved. Whereas there are vendors out there that can do this for less than the IT team can do it for. So in terms of a cost benefit, you could farm this out to a vendor who is a specialist in building this tool. And you can probably get the analytics quicker, you can get value from the tools faster, and you could even spend less money. So yes, they probably can build it. And to their ego, absolutely we know they can. It just may not make sense for them to do it. So there's a lot to consider there, and it's always a touchy topic. But I think at the end of the day, yes, they can, but ask them, should they?
Okay, it looks like I have one final question here. If I do have analytics, how do I get surgeons to partner with me?
How do you get surgeons to partner with you? That is a fantastic question as well. I think here's my best answer, because everyone's political environment is different. The way that I have seen this done the best is that what I'm going to call gains sharing agreements. Now, when I first started at UCSD, we had administrators and very powerful surgeons talking about putting together gains sharing agreements. And to their chagrin, what they found was they could never agree on exactly how to implement a gains sharing agreement because they didn't have the common analytics to agree upon. Once we built analytics and had numbers that we all agreed upon, where surgeons could be educated on how the numbers were calculated, administrators could be educated on it, and they agreed that those were the true numbers. Once you have a common negotiation landscape to play within, you can then build gain sharing programs. So, hey, let's get the cost of hip arthroplasties down from $8,000 to $7,500. Let's take the yearly savings and split them in half. Hey, hip surgeons, can we agree on the numbers? Administrator, can we agree on the numbers? Let's make a gain sharing program. If you don't have analytics, you can't do that. Now, this is a very political environment to be in. And so you're certainly going to want to pull in your finance friends, your administrator friends, and get the surgeons at the table. But having analytics is a prerequisite to doing gain sharing programs. That's my best advice from where I sit today.
Great. Thank you so much, Blake. I wanted to let everyone know that we did record this presentation, and we will send a link out to everyone who is registered as soon as tomorrow. Blake, we really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Hey, likewise. I'm glad to be here, and thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your week and a good weekend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.